The language of healing. When broken finds broken. The confession floated across the Family Feud studio, like the gentle whimper of a rescued animal learning to trust again. Vulnerable, transformative, and carrying the weight of two species learning to heal together in the most unlikely sanctuary. Steve Harvey stood at his podium, his confident smile softening as he processed what he'd just heard, recognizing that this answer would reveal one of society's most innovative approaches to rehabilitation and challenge every assumption about who deserves second chances and what forms healing can take. 33-year-old Sage Morningstar-Webb stood at the contestant podium with the quiet presence of someone who had learned to communicate with creatures who couldn't speak but understood pain perfectly. Their long brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and their hazel eyes held the particular depth that comes from discovering empathy through the patient guidance of animals who had been abandoned, abused, and given up on, just as they once had been. We asked 100 people, Steve had announced with his trademark enthusiasm, name something that taught you empathy. He'd expected the typical responses that would generate knowing nods and maybe some heartwarming stories. Having children, perhaps, caring for aging parents, volunteering at shelters, going through hardship. The kinds of empathy-building experiences that were universally relatable, the sort that would light up the board and remind everyone that compassion could be learned through various life experiences. Instead, Sage looked directly into Steve's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had discovered that healing could happen in the most unexpected partnerships, and delivered 16 words that would transform this episode from entertainment into something approaching a meditation on redemption, connection, and the miraculous power of mutual rescue. Training rescue dogs in prison taught me how to heal something as broken as I was. The studio fell into a silence so profound it seemed to absorb every gentle whimper, every tentative tail wag, every moment when trust began to replace fear and eyes that had forgotten how to hope. Not the comfortable quiet of sympathy, but the profound silence that follows a truth so counterintuitive. It forces everyone to reconsider their beliefs about punishment, rehabilitation, and whether the most healing relationships could emerge from bringing together two broken beings who needed exactly what the other could offer. Steve's perpetual motion stilled as he recognized that this wasn't just about learning empathy. This was about someone who had discovered that healing wasn't something you could do alone, that rehabilitation required relationship, that sometimes the most profound therapeutic breakthroughs happened when humans and animals rescued each other simultaneously. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled to understand what was happening. This wasn't part of any show format they'd prepared for. Contestants were supposed to share relatable empathy experiences, common compassion-building moments that audiences could understand and relate to. They weren't supposed to reveal that they had been incarcerated, and that their most profound personal transformation had happened while training abused animals behind prison walls. Sage Morningstar-Webb had served 4 years at Riverside Correctional Facility for armed robbery, a crime they had committed at 19 while struggling with addiction, homelessness, and the kind of desperation that made terrible decisions seem like the only available options. But their incarceration had coincided with the prison's participation in an innovative rehabilitation program that brought rescue dogs into the facility to be trained by inmates, creating a unique therapeutic environment where damaged humans and damaged animals could heal together. What Sage discovered in those prison kennels challenged everything they had believed about their own capacity for gentleness, patience, and the kind of unconditional love they had never learned to give or receive. Sage, Steve said softly, setting down his cards and moving away from his podium. Something in their expression had triggered every instinct Steve had developed over decades of reading people who carried stories of transformation that most people would find impossible to believe. Tell me about prison. The question opened floodgates that Sage had been keeping carefully controlled through years of re-entry challenges, employment discrimination, and the daily navigation of a society that struggled to see former inmates as anything other than permanent threats to public safety. I was 19 when I was sentenced to 6 years for armed robbery, Sage began, their voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had learned to share their story without shame but with complete honesty. I was addicted to heroin, homeless, desperate, and I made a decision that hurt innocent people and destroyed any chance I had of building a normal life. The Morningstar-Webb family stood at their team podium. Their partner River, their teenage stepson Dakota, their sister Luna, and their adoptive father Michael, all of them carrying the complex pride that came from watching someone rebuild their life from the ground up, while society continued to judge them for their worst moment. "What was prison like for you?" Steve asked gently. "Prison was everything I expected, and nothing I was prepared for," Sage replied. "Violence, despair, the constant awareness that most people on the outside had written you off as irredeemable. For the first year, I was angry, bitter, convinced that I was exactly the worthless criminal that society believed I was." The rival family, the Patterson clan from Georgia, stood frozen at their podium. They were law and order people who believed in punishment over rehabilitation, who had never imagined that prison could be anything other than a place where bad people served time for bad choices. "What changed?" Steve asked. "The dog program," Sage answered immediately. "In my second year, I was selected to participate in Pawsitive Change, a program where inmates train rescue dogs to make them more adoptable. These weren't pets, these were animals who had been abused, neglected, abandoned, some of them so traumatized they couldn't trust humans enough to be placed in homes." The studio was completely silent now. Even the usual rustling of programs and shifting in seats had stopped. 300 people held their breath as this former inmate revealed how their most profound transformation had happened through connection with creatures who understood abandonment, trauma, and the slow process of learning to trust again. "Tell me about your first dog," Steve said. "Her name was Bella," Sage replied, their face lighting up with the same gentleness they had once wrought to calming terrified animals. "She was a pit bull mix who had been used for fighting, then abandoned when she was too injured to be profitable. When she arrived at the prison, she wouldn't let anyone touch her, wouldn't eat, wouldn't make eye contact. She had every reason not to trust humans." The camera caught their partner River watching from the family podium, tears streaming down their face as they listened to Sage describe the relationship that had fundamentally changed their understanding of healing, patience, and unconditional love. "How did you connect with her?" Steve asked. "Very slowly," Sage admitted. "For weeks I just sat near her kennel, reading aloud, talking softly, letting her get used to my presence without demanding anything from her. I recognized her fear, because I carried the same fear, the terror that anyone who got too close would inevitably hurt you." They paused, looking out at the studio audience, as if seeing their own story reflected in every face that had ever felt abandoned or written off. "The breakthrough came when I realized that I wasn't trying to fix Bella," Sage continued. "I was trying to understand her. I was learning her language, respecting her boundaries, proving through consistency that I could be trusted. And in doing that, I was learning things about patience and empathy that I had never learned in my entire life." Steve found himself moving closer to Sage, drawn by recognition of transformation that had happened through the most unlikely therapeutic relationship between two broken beings who needed exactly what the other could offer. "What did Bella teach you?" Steve asked. "That healing takes time," Sage answered immediately. "That trust has to be earned through consistent, gentle answers, not demanded through force. That love isn't about control or ownership. It's about creating safe space for someone to become who they really are underneath their trauma." "How long did it take for Bella to trust you?" Steve asked. 3 months before she would let me touch her," Sage replied. 6 months before she would play. 8 months before she would look forward to seeing me. And it was the most profound education in empathy I could have received. Because I was learning that healing isn't lentil, that setbacks don't mean failure, that patience and consistency could accomplish what force and intimidation never could. The Patterson family found themselves emotionally invested in a story that challenged their understanding of rehabilitation, of whether people who had committed crimes deserved opportunities for transformation, of what forms effective therapy could take. How did working with dogs change how you saw yourself? Steve asked. Dogs don't know your criminal history, Sage replied, their voice growing stronger with conviction. They don't care what mistakes you've made or what society thinks about you. They respond to who you are in the present moment, how gentle your hands are, how calm your voice is, how consistent your behavior is. For the first time in my life, I was being judged not by my worst decision, but by my capacity for kindness. They reached into their jacket pocket and pulled out a small photo, a before and after shot that showed a terrified, scarred pit bull transforming into a confident, happy dog. This is Bella on the day she arrived and the day she was adopted, Sage said, showing the photo to Steve. She went from a dog who couldn't trust humans to a certified therapy animal who now works with children who have experienced trauma. She taught me that transformation is possible for anyone if they're given patience, consistency, and unconditional acceptance. Steve studied the photo, seeing not just canine rehabilitation but parallel human transformation, not just animal training but proof that healing could happen when broken beings helped each other become whole. Tell me about your release and what you're doing now, Steve said. When I was released 4 years ago, I knew I wanted to expand prison dog programs, Sage replied. I had experienced firsthand how working with traumatized animals could teach empathy, patience, responsibility, and self-worth to people who society had written off as irredeemable. I started Second Chance Partners, a nonprofit that places rescue dog training programs in correctional facilities across the country. The studio audience began to react, not with applause but with the complex sounds of people processing a story that challenged assumptions about punishment, rehabilitation, and who deserved opportunities for transformation. We now operate in 18 prisons, Sage continued, training over 300 inmates annually to work with rescue dogs. The recidivism rate for program participants is less than 8%, compared to the national average of nearly 70%. But more importantly, we've saved thousands of dogs who would have been euthanized and transformed them into beloved family pets and certified therapy animals. Steve Harvey had spent decades hosting television shows, meeting thousands of people, hearing countless stories of personal transformation and professional calling. But standing there looking at Sage Morningstar-Webb, he saw something that transcended traditional rehabilitation to become a form of mutual rescue that benefited everyone involved. What would you say to someone who thinks convicted criminals don't deserve opportunities to work with animals? Steve asked. I would say, Sage answered, looking directly into the camera, that animals don't discriminate based on past mistakes. They respond to present behavior, and they teach humans things about empathy, patience, and unconditional love that traditional therapy often can't reach. The men and women in these programs aren't just training dogs, they're learning to access parts of themselves they thought were gone forever. The studio was completely silent as Sage continued, and I would say that the dogs benefit as much as the humans do. These are animals who have been abandoned, abused, given up on by society. In prison programs, they receive 24-hour care, individualized training, and unlimited patience from people who understand what it feels like to be written off and forgotten. Steve began removing his suit jacket, his movements deliberate and symbolic. The jacket was navy blue, expensive, representing success achieved while never experiencing the kind of institutional punishment and social rejection that Sage had endured. Sage, Steve said, draping the jacket around their shoulders. This jacket represents something I lit while society supported my efforts, while my mistakes were forgiven or overlooked. But you know what it doesn't represent? Sage looked up at him, curious about where this was leading. It doesn't represent the kind of wisdom that comes from rock bottom, Steve continued. It doesn't represent the empathy that's learned through shared trauma and mutual rescue. It doesn't represent the understanding that healing happens best when broken beings help each other become whole. The jacket was slightly too large for Sage's frame, but they wore it like recognition of the professional respect that Sage was slowly beginning to give to formerly incarcerated people who had transformed their lives. "You didn't just train dogs," Steve said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just learned something profound about rehabilitation and redemption. "You learned to heal hearts, starting with your own. You discovered that empathy isn't something you're born with or without. It's something you can learn through patient relationship with beings who need the same healing you need." Steve turned to address not just Sage but the entire studio, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who had just witnessed an innovative approach to justice that prioritized transformation over punishment. "To everyone watching this," he said, looking directly into the camera, "Sage Morningstar-Webb represents something revolutionary about criminal justice and rehabilitation. They've proven that healing happens best through relationship, that empathy can be learned through service to others, that sometimes the most effective therapy happens when we help something as broken as ourselves become whole." He turned back to Sage, his expression filled with profound respect and admiration. "You've shown that prison doesn't have to be just punishment. It can be preparation for becoming the person you were meant to be all along," Steve said. "And you've proven that dogs don't just need rescue. They provide it, teaching humans things about love and healing that we can't learn any other way." The game show had been completely forgotten. This wasn't about points or prizes anymore. This was about redemption, about healing, about the power of mutual rescue to transform both humans and animals who had been written off by society. "There's something I want to share," Sage said, reaching into their phone and pulling up a video footage. "This came from Tommy Rodriguez, who just completed our program at Valley State Prison. He sent this with a picture of the dog he trained." The video played, showing a man in prison clothes holding a golden retriever, both of them looking peaceful and content. "Sage," he said to the camera, "working with Luna taught me things about myself I never knew existed. I learned patience, gentleness, responsibility, and what it feels like to be needed by something that depends on you completely. I'm getting out next year, and I know I'm a different person because of what Luna taught me about love. Thank you for creating a program that saved both of us." The studio erupted, not in typical game show applause but in the kind of sustained emotional response that recognizes innovation when it witnesses it. River Morningstar-Webb left the family podium and crossed the stage to Sage, embracing them as the audience continued to celebrate not just their personal transformation, but their creation of programs that were transforming corrections across the country. 6 months later, Steve Harvey received a package from Oregon. Inside was a collar and leash along with a photo showing dozens of inmates and dogs graduating from a prison training program, all of them looking proud and hopeful. The note attached read, "Mr. Harvey, I wanted you to know that your recognition of our work has helped expand Second Chance Partners to 5 new states. We've now trained over 2,000 dogs and helped 800 inmates develop empathy skills that dramatically reduce their likelihood of reoffending. This collar belonged to Max, the first dog I trained in prison. He taught me that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, patience, and the willingness to keep trying, even when progress is slow." Today, Second Chance Partners operates in 24 correctional facilities across 12 states, with plans to expand nationally. The program has been studied by criminologists and animal behaviorists, proving that animal-assisted rehabilitation creates lasting transformation for both species involved. Sage speaks at law enforcement conferences, corrections symposiums, and animal welfare organizations, advocating for programs that recognize the healing power of the human-animal bond. The photo of Bella still sits on Sage's desk, a reminder that healing happens in relationship, that empathy can be learned through patient service to others, and that sometimes the most profound teachers are those who can't speak but understand everything about abandonment, trauma, and the slow process of learning to trust again. Sage Morningstar-Webb proved that rehabilitation works best when it involves relationship, that empathy is a skill that can be developed through practice, and that sometimes the most effective healers are those who have been broken themselves and found ways to become whole again through helping others heal. Sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that everyone deserves a second chance, humans and animals alike, and that healing happens best when broken beings help each other remember how to love again.